Chapter 17. The Ultimate Battle. Kong's axe rose high into the air through the hole made by Godzilla's breath and slammed down into the ground, forcing dozens of people to flee the area. Kong pulled himself up and out of the massive hole, and, as he'd expected, he came face to face with Godzilla, who was staring him down from a respectful distance with a vicious snarl on his face. But he wasn't alone. Kong also spied Mothra thanks to her magnificent wings, which were gently flickering with light. Rival, I seek no fight with you. I do not care. I showed you mercy in the ocean, and you repay me by violating the ancient lands and... Godzilla's eyes fell upon the axe at Kong's side, and his eyes narrowed. And you dare to return to the surface with such a tool made from the bones of my ancestors. Godzilla lifted and slammed his tails into the ground, causing a smaller skyscraper behind him to immediately crumble and fall to the ground, covering half a dozen blocks with rubble. It was the home of my kin, and this is a tool they left behind for their protection. I will not be ashamed for accepting it as my own. Godzilla's eyes flared with blue light, which then shot through his body and spines from head to tail tip. You intend to use it against me? I intend to use it against any who threaten me. Godzilla took a single massive step and hunched forward. I warned you last time that if we met again, you would bow to me. I remember. Bow! I refuse. Godzilla's lip pulled back fully and trembled as he continued snarling. I will not repeat myself, wayward rival. Friend, Mothra called. Godzilla's head slowly turned and he looked at Mothra out of the corner of his eyes. I would speak with the wayward one. Godzilla's snarling relaxed slightly, but he returned his gaze to Kong and locked it there before taking a half step backward, while Mothra flew closer and landed on a building next to Godzilla. How are you? I am the guardian of the skies, and I seek to make peace for all our kin. Wayward one, where do you come from? Kong was hesitant to answer. This flying creature was new, a stranger, but she showed no aggression unlike Godzilla. He had placed his faith in the tiny creature before and been rewarded with pain and loneliness, but they also given him hope. Perhaps this one could do the same. I come from an island which is now drowned by a never-ending storm. What is it that you want, wayward one? I wish only to find a new home and be left in peace. This one, Kong pointed to Godzilla, would see me bow or be killed merely for existing. Godzilla's snarl intensified. The Alpha protects our kin by maintaining balance. When they clash, he will bring them to balance part ways. When their territory shifts, he will bring them to bow and establish their new boundaries. When their powers evolve, he will bring them down to bow and maintain peace with each other. He seeks only the same for you. If you would bow to him, he will accept your submission and allow you to establish yourself and leave you in peace. Kong's lip pushed up in a huff. I need permission to exist. Not for existence, for coexistence. Explain. Our kin are powerful, each one capable of killing the next or tearing the land and ecosystem we all rely on asunder. We must all be in agreement to exist peacefully with one another. And in order to maintain that peace, the Alpha must keep order. So it has always been. So must it always be. Why is it a matter of must? Martha's head came up slightly. You are young. My age that matters not. Explain why my current existence is a matter of me being forced to bow to another when I could just live in peace on my own as I always have done before. Since before any of us could remember, our kind have always existed in conflict. Our battles reshaped the landscape, changed the weather patterns, and reshaped the ecosystems itself, which had a devastating consequences for us all. It was not until the Alpha's ancestor rose to prominence that our kind finally found peace in coexistence under the Alpha's rule. Our submission to the Alpha is insurance that we will all continue to coexist without risking the world we all call home. Kung huffed. Ancient ways are meant for ancient times. Today, I bow to no one. I exist on my own, and I bother no one who does not bother me. Godzilla's tail whipped around behind him and slammed into the base of a nearby building, causing it to collapse. Our ways ensure peace, wayward rival. You are among the alpha species, and your call could endanger the peace of our kin have worked hard to cultivate. I make no such calls, but you can. Godzilla's body started releasing low-frequency waves which shook the ground and the building all around him. Guardian of Guardian of the skies, you have spoken long enough. If the wayward one will not be swayed by words, I will make him bow. Martha's head sunk slightly. Very well. She then flew up and away to land on a building near the edge of the city, while Godzilla stomped slowly towards Kong until the two were practically nose to nose. You may not intend to threaten our kin or our world, but your intention do not change the reality. You are a threat, and if you insist on acting like one, I will treat you like one. Godzilla's tail rose into the sky and slammed into the street behind him. Bow! Kong's grip on the axe tightened. No. Godzilla lunged forward, slamming his forehead into Kong's, which sent him reeling back several steps. By the time Kong recovered, Godzilla was already on top of him again, lunging forward with both claws extended towards his shoulders. Kong brought the axe up and intercepted Godzilla's grip and helped keep him at bay while Kong repositioned his leg further behind him so he could dig in and push back. The two immediately came to a stalemate, glaring at each other over the axe as neither bunch budged an inch. Godzilla's eyes flashed, and Kong instinctively pushed the axe aside to the right and leaped to his left. Then the maneuver turned Godzilla's head to his right as the blue breath was unleashed into the buildings around them, while Kong safely ducked away in the other building, behind another skyscraper. Godzilla's head whipped around, dragging the breath with it as it sliced through the buildings like a hot knife through butter. Kong ducked down low, narrowly avoiding the breath as it soared over him and brought the building down. Jumping away and turning towards Godzilla, Kong rushed the Alpha and slammed his shoulder into Godzilla's stomach and sending him off his feet and spines first into the skyscraper behind him. Momentarily stuck, Godzilla looked up just in time to see the glowing blue X raised above Kong's head as it was slammed down towards him. Using his tail, Godzilla pushed against the ground and off to the side, and Kong's axe slammed down into and through the building as easily as tearing wet paper. Godzilla's tail came up and around and wrapped around Kong's throat as he attempted to pull the axe free off the ground, and Kong was yanked off his feet and whipped in a half circle before being let go and thrown through the air for hundreds of meters and skidding to a halt as he slammed into a section of suburban houses and apartment complexes. Shaking his head, Kong coughed to clear his airways, but there was no rest for the weary as a flashing blue light caught his attention. Godzilla unleashed his atomic breath once again, which slammed into Kong's chest, sending him sliding back along the ground, while singeing his fur and skin. The breath came to an end, and Kong rolled to a stop at the base of another skyscraper, which was now swaying dangerously above him and threatening to come down. As Godzilla stomped towards him, Kong pushed himself to his feet and brushed off his chest. The sting of his now burned flesh was harsh, but his desire to make this creature, this self-proclaimed alpha, fail in his quest to make Kong bow, now burned even more. Kong balled up his fist and beat his chest with a powerful roar before charging Godzilla, whose mouth opened to unleash another stream of his breath. With agility belaying his size and bulk, Kong leaped forward at an angle, just narrowly missing the breath, and used one of the smaller buildings next to him to throw himself at Godzilla's stomach level. With both arms stretched out, he wrapped them around the Alpha's waist and smashed into him, sending both to the ground, with Godzilla's breath flying higher into the air before dissipating. Kong quickly used his long arms to his advantage and pulled himself to his feet while gripping Godzilla by the table and tugging with all his might. Godzilla's eyes snapped open as he found himself being slowly dragged backward, and he slammed his claws into the ground to attempt to stop Kong, but it was no use. Kong's raw strength saw Godzilla's claws as no obstacle, while Godzilla was pulled further and faster as Kong managed to go into a power walk, and then a jog before whipping Godzilla around and slamming him into a series of buildings head first. It was a mighty effort, and although it was well rewarded, it did not come without a cost. Kong took a few slow, deep breaths to quell his now racing heart. He had never before exerted such effort as he did in that moment. Even the calls of that flying creature in the ancient lands couldn't compare to the effort he took to pull and throw this one. His hands felt like they were on fire, and he looked at them. He saw why. Godzilla's hard scales had cut into his palms, which were now bleeding from several small cuts and accompanied by several scrapes and minor friction burns. Kong looked up, and Godzilla was now in the process of making it to his feet, with spines flashing brilliantly. Knowing full well what was coming, Kong made a mad dash for the axe, and just as Godzilla turned his head and let fly, the axe came up and absorbed the attack. Kong was pushed backward by the force of the breath, but he remained safe for now. Godzilla stopped his attack, and Kong notices that he took a single large breath before shaking his body off the rubble. So your stamina, too, knows limits, Kong thought to himself. Looking around, Kong noticed that there are many of the skyscrapers in the immediate areas had already been brought down by Godzilla's breath and tail swipe. But not far away, closer to where Mothra sat, there was a plenty of large city and towering skylines. Looking back to Godzilla, Kong swung the axe a few times and roared at Godzilla, who roared furiously in response. Godzilla suddenly burst into a run towards Kong, but the distance was more than enough for Kong to prepare to shake off the initial shock of Godzilla's speed and dash towards his foe. With the axe up and ready, Kong prepared to hammer it down to Godzilla's left shoulder, and as he swung, Godzilla skidded to a halt and brought his arm to stop the blow. But the swing suddenly shifted its angle and sunk beneath Godzilla's arm, and the razor-sharp end of the axe slammed into Godzilla's side, just beneath his ribs. Godzilla howled in agony as blood burst forth from the wound and spilled into the streets below. Kong pulled the axe free and then promptly backed away towards the large building and the skyscrapers of the city while Godzilla reeled. Seizing the opportunity, Kong disappeared into the concrete jungle. Meanwhile, the team had finally reached the exit of the massive hole Godzilla had created and burst into the open air before leveling out the heave. Holy shit, Ford sighed. That was quite a ride, eh? Joe chuckled. Not funny, Dad. Joe nodded a little sheepishly. Where's Kong? Dr. Andrews asked. Don't know, but there's Godzilla, Dr. Lin said while pointing to Godzilla's location. Looks like he's hurt, Dr. Chen remarked. Kong must have used that axe he found, Dr. Lin added. Serizawa's lips tightened as he saw the blood trailing down Godzilla's side, and Dr. Chen put a hand on his shoulder. She then felt a small wave of familiarity, and he looked to the side before a smile graced her lips. Look like, Looks like Martha is here as well, she said calmly. The team looked over and saw her on top of a building. What's she doing? Dr. Lin asked. She's observing, Dr. Chen replied. Why? Dr. Andrews asked. She will not interfere with this fight. Godzilla and Kong need to settle this themselves, she replied. Shaking off the pain, Godzilla stood up and huffed through his nose as he stomped forward into the city. Well, here we go, Ford muttered. Godzilla walked slowly and cautiously while checking each corner as he lumbered through the streets. Looking up towards the skyscraper rooftop, he was reminded of the battle in San Francisco. That pesky flying nuisance liked using the buildings to its advantages and either hid or tried to knock Godzilla into them. If this wayward rival was anything like that other creature, he might try to do the same. Godzilla's spines began flickering each step as he prepared himself to use the atomic breath. The moment the wayward one showed himself, he'd be ready. Meanwhile, Kong continued to watch and wait. Godzilla came out to the edge of the harbor looking out at the ocean. The wayward one wouldn't dare challenge him in the water after what happened last time. So he turned around and scanned every building for the signs of his challengers, but there was nothing. This scaleless creature knew the art of invisibility well, and the smell of the cities were muddying his semi-directional sense of smell. And from above, meandering back into the cityscape, Godzilla lowered himself to the ground and began crawling on all four at a slow and even pace. And from above, Kong's head peeked out carefully from behind a skyscraper ledge. With the axe stuck against his side and a hunk of rubble held in the other hand, Kong hurled the rubble out to Godzilla's left as he was passing below. Godzilla's head snapped towards the sounds, and his eyes flared to life with blue lights as his atomic breath was primed for firing. But the sound of heavy wind above forced Godzilla to cancel his attack and look skyward as Kong dropped in with the axe held above his head, ready to strike. Thinking quickly, Godzilla launched himself shoulder first into the building Kong had jumped from, which caused the building to fall onto Kong in midair just before he hit the ground next to Godzilla. The mighty Alpha did its best to roll out of the way, but was still partially caught under the debris, as Kong also took a large portion of the impact as it all came tumbling down. Using the axe and his brute strength, Kong managed to throw the debris off him, but not before Godzilla had managed to push himself back onto all four and was rushing towards him with jaws agape, aiming for Kong's neck. Kong brought the end of the axe handle forward and jammed it into Godzilla's mouth, nearly shoving it into his throat as Godzilla coughed and choked while being pushed back, which gave Kong room to get to his feet and brush off the dust and debris from his fur. Rushing in, he slammed his knee into the side of Godzilla's head thoroughly, throwing the mighty Alpha Titan for a loop as he fell to the ground in a heap. Kong raised his axe high in the air with a roar, but he found himself unable to bring the axe down. Godzilla's head then snapped in his direction, followed by a sweep of his tail to knock Kong to the ground and onto his back. and Godzilla was swiftly on top of Kong, trying to get a grip with his front claw while snapping repeatedly at Kong's shoulder and neck area, while Kong held him off with the axe handle. Pushing up and as far from himself as he could, Kong attempted to give himself space to use his legs to kick himself free, but Godzilla's front claws found a new target, Kong's burned chest. Kong roared in pain as the mighty Alpha's claws dug into and tore at his flesh. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. Kong couldn't stop it. Godzilla's arm flailed too widely to predict where they would end up. But alas, Godzilla's claws slowed enough for Kong to grab a hold of them while being forced to abandon the axe which was thrown to the side. Godzilla leaned in and snapped once more at Kong's neck and managed to rake his top row of teeth against the flesh at the juncture of Kong's neck and shoulder, leaving another long bloody trail of scratches behind. Godzilla rose up onto his feet and continued locking hands with Kong and pushed him down into the ground while bringing his right foot to stomp on Kong's chest. Kong roared mightily at first, but that roar turned into a gasp and a wheeze as Godzilla brought his full weight down. Godzilla let go of Kong's hand, and the mighty ape tried desperately to grip Godzilla's leg and move it to no avail. Godzilla stood tall, but was quickly reminded of his own injury when Kong's fist slammed into the gaping wound on Godzilla's side. The Alpha roared to the sky in pain and anger before lifting his foot and slamming it down as hard as he could, pushing Kong further into the ground, along with blowing a cloud of dust up all around him. Kong released a cough and a gasp as he fought to take in decent breath of air, and Godzilla leaned down, nearly nose to nose with Kong, and stared him down. Kong stared back defiantly, neither one giving an inch to this much quieter contest. Godzilla took in a huge gulp of air and unleashed his alpha claw directly at Kong. The claw shook the world and grabbed the attention of titans the world over. As it was not a summons, nobody moved to come to Godzilla's aid, but they all heard it. Meanwhile, the call continued, and Kong, disgusted by the display, took a deep breath as he could and managed to roar right back at Godzilla. Godzilla's call came to a stop, and Kong momentarily thereafter. Godzilla stood up straight, but did not remove his foot from Kong's chest. You remain defiant, wayward rival. Why? Kong coughed, losing a little blood in the process. I bow to no one. Godzilla pressed his weight forward into Kong's chest a bit more, and the cracking of Kong's rib reverberated throughout the cityscape. You are young and foolish. If you will not submit to my call, I have no choice but to end you. Your potential as a rival alpha presents too great of a risk. Godzilla's foot pushed down harder, and a loud snap assaulted the air. Kong's breastbone had been split, and his ribcage began to cave in under Godzilla's weight. Kong gripped Godzilla's foot and tried to lift it, but the pain shooting through his chest robbed him of all his strength. Friend! Godzilla turned his head. You have prevailed. Let it be over. Godzilla's eyes narrowed. You speak out of turn, Guardian of the Skies. Mothra's wing flashed brilliantly, forcing Godzilla to close his eyes and look away. Do not become the intruder. The light faded, and Godzilla slowly blinked his eyes open and looked back at her. He was cruel. You are not. Yet in a zeal to defend the balance, you have shown this wayward one little else but cruelty. She leaped into the air and hovered over a bit closer. Let it end, my alpha. Godzilla slowly looked down at Kong, who was still gasping for breath and trying to move Godzilla's foot off his chest. Godzilla's nerves scrunched momentarily, but he lifted his foot and stepped away. Kong coughed several times and continued grasping gasping for a decent breath as Godzilla came around and looked at Mothra. You would compare me to the intruder. Mothra landed on a smaller skyscraper, so she was eye level with Godzilla. Cruelty begets cruelty, my alpha. It can corrupt the heart as the realization that anger unleashed leads to a sense of relief and satisfaction. But do not get lost in that fog. Don't let your anger cloud your ability to see. Cruelty will bring nothing but untoward violence and destruction upon our world, just as the intruder wanted it. Godzilla took in a deep breath and slowly looked away at the ground. I understand. Turning around, Godzilla observed Kong as he forced himself up into a seated position against a building. Wayward rival, I will respect your desire to live in solitude in the ancient lands, but as long as you do not trouble our kin with your alpha call, I will leave you be. Kong barely clinging to consciousness held his chest with one hand and attempted to push himself into a standing position with the other, only to collapse into a heap on his back with no further hint of movement or life. Mothra hung her head, and Godzilla gave a nod as well. He will leave. He will live, Guardian. One as powerful as he will not be killed so easily. I pray you are right, my alpha. The wayward one does not deserve death for merely wishing to exist. Now let us search for the intruder. Godzilla looked up at the mountains above the cities through the cracks between the skyscrapers, and the sun began to rise beyond the horizon behind him. And as the light slowly overtook the darkness, Godzilla's eyes narrowed as his sense alerted him to a rapid and unwelcome change.